the Kan Sicilian can be mastered in just a few hours to 10 hours. That's the range. Put some brackets around that. 10 hours tops, I think you can master this opening. It's played at all levels. It's played at top level. The only annoying thing is if white plays the Maroxy. But if you want a follow-up video to this, I'll show a game from yesterday I got where I beat an international master playing this opening. And I never play it because I used to, and I switched to the French, yada, yada, yada. You don't care about my repertoire. Let's get into it. These are two grandmasters. I'm going to be showing the theory throughout the video, and then we're going to get into the game. Theory first, game afterwards. They're two 2580 FIDE grandmasters. I'm sorry I didn't even say their names. We have Diego Flores with the black pieces, Julio Bachera Rivero with the white pieces, played in Bogota, Colombia 2010. We got all that out of the way. Let's get into it. This is the Kan Sicilian. You go e6 after d4, takes, a6. Kan Sicilian setup. You open up the dark squared bishop, you close out the light squared bishop, and you stop anything and everything from coming to b5. You're also going to be able to play b5, bishop b7 later on in some lines. I'm going to show you guys the fun lines today. Now, in this position, white played knight c3. However, if he played bishop to d3, move order does matter. You want to go knight f6 here because that's where you want the knight in this system. And it provokes them to play this pawn move to e5, which you would then pick up a pawn with check and be winning. So it's just a little move order trick that some of your opponents might fall into. On knight c3, you do not want to go knight f6 because after e5, there is no check here. So that will serve as a tempo gainer for white, that is. So queen c7. I can make a separate video on the b5 lines. Those are a little higher level. Queen c7, safe, secure, easy. Let's talk about it. Well, it stops white's bishop from coming to f4. It applies some pressure on this knight that can be dealt if they move the bishop to e3. You go for the pin line. And it aims at h2, which you're going to assume they're castling kingside. So this queen, it does a lot. It also allows you to play knight f6 again, because now on e5, you guard that square. So queen c7, multi-purpose. That is a perfect queen. Bishop to d3, now we get knight f6 because white cannot play e5. Castles and bishop to c5, attacking this knight. Now there's two lines here. White can either go knight back to b3, hitting the bishop, or they can go bishop to e3, guarding the knight. One thing I want to talk about, because when I learned this, I was unaware of this. You do have to go knight f6 before you go bishop to c5. Move order does matter, because I never really liked these theoretical lines where white goes queen g4. It's kind of like in the French. You know how I play queen d7 to go for f5 to guard g7? You really just don't want to deal with this. Like, what are you going to do? g6, weaken the dark squares, where your dark squared bishop can't go to g7, king f8 to guard it. None of it looks too clean. There's a pawn sacrifice line. I don't really recommend it, though. So knight f6 stops queen g4. That is huge. It's just good to know that idea. Bishop c5. Now, in the game, we get bishop to e3, but let's talk about knight to b3. This bishop goes all the way back. It is a very long board, and people tend to forget about that guy later on. This is a beautiful bishop, and they cannot go bishop e3 because you'll happily snap off their bishop, and those are double isolated pawns. Do you like double isolated pawns? I don't. I love facing them. You put a knight here, and you're like, you cannot move for the rest of the game. The other nice thing about the Kan, unlike the Najdorf, is, well, it's less sharp. 10 hours of studying versus 1,000. Which do you prefer? Maybe you prefer 1,000. Maybe you're just the GOAT. But the king can stay in the center here because of this safe pawn structure. And that is an added benefit because sometimes you can go queenside, like we're going to see in the game. And then it really throws off your opponent. But they're probably not going to go bishop e3. Common is to go king h1 to play f4. This is what my opponents do. And I really like this h5 idea, which basically white plays in f4 in the middle game, right? In an open Sicilian, f4 middle game idea. Closed Sicilian Grand Prix, f4 is an opening idea. But this is everything you want. It is absolutely beautiful. And after h3, though you do have the fork, I just want to show that this is checkmate. So this bishop and this rook, they make a good team in this position. So that's a fun line. h5 is a fun idea. But in the game, we get bishop e3. Now, I remember I played this in Bullet right when I learned it, and I played the move knight c6. Egregious. Why? Because of knight takes e6, blundering the bishop. So you lose a pawn. It's not a good pawn to lose. Then you can't castle. Oh, this bishop on this diagonal stopping you from castling. Annoying. Mind you, happens sometimes. So you should go d6. This allows you to repurpose the knight to e5. It defends the bishop directly, so there's no discovered attack tactics. And remember that anti-positional Sicilian we talked about? The Sveshnikov, e5. You get this pawn structure. I also want to pitch this pawn structure to people because it looks gross. It's anti-positional in every aspect. What I mean by that is it creates a backwards pawn, meaning it's a pawn you cannot push. I mean, legally you can push it, but ideally you want to push it, but in reality, you can't push it because you will lose it. So d5 is something black really wants to play to equalize. White's going to want to blockade it and post up in the outpost. And yeah, that's what it does. But you got your bishop out of the pawn chain, so it's even more attractive because your dark squared bishop is better, and the light squared bishop is now open on this diagonal, so that is good. I had to check if I was recording because sometimes I forget to click the button. But we get e5, knight b3. You don't want them to snap this off with the knight, so you snap off their dark squared bishop. Again, they don't want double isolated pawns, so they take with the rook is logical. Bishop e6, it's all about claiming d5. It's all about who controls d5. If white controls d5, black's going to have a tough time equalizing, expanding, playing in the center. If black controls d5, you get everything you want in life, which no one should get everything they want in life, but you get a lot of what you want in life, and that should be the goal. Queen to d2, moving the queen up, opening the other rook. That's what that does. And knight to c6. Now this can go to e7 to over control d5, where it can then jump to g6 or f5. Also, which way are we going to castle? White doesn't know. Are we going to castle kingside? That's a pretty open third rank for the rook. That's a pretty closed third rank for the rook. So I think castling queenside makes more sense in this position. And then you could be aggressive on the king side. And you don't play the Sicilian to be like a hermit. You play the Sicilian to be a little aggressive. And I really hope you guys show this. Honestly, I have a student who wanted to learn this, and it refreshed my memory, or I refreshed my memory on the lines. And I was like, damn, I have respect for this opening. We get rook to d1, castles queenside, and bishop takes a6. I mean, these are 25, 80 FIDE players. They know how to checkmate a king and queen versus king, I'll tell you that. So what is this sacrifice about? It's actually quite good. You cannot take this bishop. I mean, again, legally you can, but it is ill-advised. Sometimes I stumble over my words, but sometimes I don't. Knight to d5. It's all about this d5 square, and it's quite bad, quite fast, because you're either going to get forked and lose that way, or maybe you might be like, okay, I'll just take with the bishop. Fair, but then you got to move the knight, and when you move the knight, the third rank comes to life. So that's kind of the ideas behind this bishop takes a6, but black strikes with d5, active counterplay. Your rook is on the same file as the queen. Life is good. Now you're threatening fork of your own, and you have a tempo gainer over here. This also eliminates the threats of knight to b5, right? You can envision knight to b5, and then you have problems on d6. But after the pawn is pushed to d5, the knight cannot come to d6, and there's no threats over there. Knight takes. You could take with either piece, but, well, actually, you really should take with the bishop there, because even though it's an open, or even though it's going to become an open board, so see, if you follow principle and you're like, oh, open board, bishops are better, let me take with the knight, beep, boop, bop, bop, beep. Principles are made to be broken, right? This knight is clearly more valuable than that bishop was. It is a tank. It gains a tempo. It can go to f4. There is a discovery on the queen. And it covers c3. Look at that. I'm seeing that for the first time. We get rook to d3, knight to f4. White's in some trouble. Because if he takes, we're going to take with the rook. That queen needs to move. There is no fork because of the bishop. And then you just win a bishop. And you just win the game. So actually, white cannot move the rook because it's also pinned. So he moves the bishop. He's like, all right, I'm going to cash out. I get a knight, or a bishop rather, and a pawn for a rook. I have some pressure on the queen side. So there's a little bit of counterplay, but that is a backwards pawn. That is an isolated pawn. And We're kind of built up on that. He goes king b8 preemptively. Right, in this position, you're up material. So you got to think the longer the game goes on without any fireworks, I'm chilling. So just consolidate, improve your pieces, make sure you don't get checkmated, and then good stuff will happen. We got rook to c1 a pin, rook to d6, cutting, not cutting the pin, untying the queen from being pinned to the knight. Boom, that's how I want to say that. We got queen to e3. There is no back rank, but maybe he's, thinking of some things over here. So black goes f6, consolidating. Pawn chains are typically good. We got a4, solidifying the bishop. Again, he's consolidating, trying to guard everything. White's like, I'm not going to get back ranked. Black's like, my queen is untied. I'm going to aim at that pawn on d3 right now and unpin myself. Who would benefit from a trade of rooks? The persons who was up material. See, now it's easy because the board is less complicated. We get knight to c5, stopping any trades. I'm going to give it to white. That is a very good knight. There are some tactics in the midst. Beware. That is also a good knight. That is a beautiful knight. You want to blockade isolated pawns, right? Because then they can't get kicked out by other pieces. Trades will help. So if he wants to boot the knight, he's going to need to simplify the board, which then helps you. King to h1, white's like, all right, I don't know what to do. I'm going to move my king. Black's like, all right, well, you moved your king, so I'm going to move my king. And this is very nice because the best way to coordinate a king against a knight so that there's no tactics. This is beautiful in the endgame. You coordinate your king against a knight by a diagonal with one square in between. And then I forget how many moves it takes for the knight to give you check, but it's the best possible coordination against a knight with a king. So in pawn endgames, pawn versus knight, pawn versus whatever imbalance, do this. Good things can happen. And there's no discover to check, right? Don't see ghosts. Many people might not go to a7 because they're like, oh, there could be threats if this knight move and this knight move. But can this knight move? Only if you want it to. Do you want it to? No. So you're fine. There's nothing there. I mean, come on. All right, king to h2. White's like, all right, I still don't know what to do. Black's like, get out of here. I'm going to trade. Board has become a little more simplified. We get queen to e7. This is a good move. It allows you to open up the board, which is what you want to do, and get your queen into action. We got queen c8. Do not get checkmated, right? There's a couple checkmates over here. So he goes rook to d8. He's like, get out of here, and white has to. We got queen to b7, aiming in on this diagonal, still allowing you to push this pawn. A little bit of a slow play, but a fine play, because again, what does white have? He gets his knight out. Again, do not see ghosts. You are well coordinated on c6. We get rook c8 kicking out the queen. Rook c5. Okay, the bar doesn't like it. I do kind of like it because it just freezes. It freezes all of white's pieces, and there's nothing that they could do. It ties down the pawn, even though you were already tying down the pawn. Things are good. Rook's on the 5th. And imagine you're going to push this pawn to the 4th rank, so the 5th rank will be open. That's a good way to think about it, I think. Bishop to c4. We get pawn e4. All right, he's like, I cannot improve my pieces anymore. Let me push the pawn. White solidifies his bishop on c4. We get queen check. And the point of the queen check was it's not a spite check. Why was the queen check so good? Well, you're not entering on the light squares because he decided not to take, so you enter on the dark squares. This queen is just simply a tank right now. You are coordinating, you're still guarding the pawn, but it has better vision of on the dark squares over there. How do we win this, guys? To beat a GM, you need to beat them like 10 times over. There's always counterplay. So when you're up material, give the material back in a favorable way. You win a pawn that is 2 away from promoting, and you're very well coordinated on the first rank. So, and this bishop and queen are, they're not the best, really. They're just not the best. So we get queen to a3. Do not go d2. It's never too late to lose a chess game or fall into a perpetual. Even though it's still winning, you really don't want to find the route for the king that avoids all the checks. Just go queen e5. Stop the check before it happens. It's well coordinated on e1, right? They went queen a3, so we can't enter on c1. So e1 is better, and we're going to push the pawn soon. A desperado, a5, going for some perpetuals. But after taking the pawn, white resigns because there are no perpetuals, right? They take with check, you take, and then you could block with the knight or the queen. There are no more checks. This pawn will run. If they go queen d2, you could just take this pawn. You're probably going to win this game. Don't mouse slip, especially if you're playing in person, because that You might be the first person ever to mouse slip in person. So, a great game by these players. Again, played in Colombia 2010. Thank you as always for watching. Give the con a try. Let me know how it goes. Have a great day. Boom.